Hi everyone. We're going to do James Baldwin's Great, and I do mean great, the Notes of a Native Son on this lecture. And this is from the book, which I keep see if I can find it back here. Sorry, changing my screen door the other day. Oh, I keep forgetting to do this before I start my lectures anyway. A book well worth having, an absolute classic. And Baldwin, again, a man who's growing up, I think late 30s into, I think he dies in the 80s. This was originally published in 1955, and he's sort of looking back probably into the 40s, at least in the story we're doing here. Um, Baldwin probably maps out sort of with exquisite articulation, oftentimes, the African American experience, the inner experience of what it's like, and especially um, this essay, right? And that's what we're doing is our personal reflection papers. And again, the personal reflection paper is going to be, something you're writing about from your life, but you and how it affects you is sort of the secondary subject, and the main subject is the experience itself. And I think that fits here. This is a again, very much in some ways, about his, what it's like from the inside out, right? Very, very much to be a black man in the 1940s Harlem. But really, he tells his story, much of it through his father, and also what he sees going on in the Harlem around him. And we do have um, essentially, and again, a little bit about Baldwin. I mean, such an impressive figure. And again, the one, probably the salient, I think, trait about Baldwin's writing is this really, as I said before, this sort of exquisite articulation. He can really, and this remarkable exactitude to his prose at times, which really. It's sometimes just astonishing. He's also written some terrific novels. Go Tell It to the Mountain. What was the one they made a very good film of it about a year ago? If Beale Street Could Talk, I believe, which is also very good. Um, but Baldwin was also a man with his kind of thumb on the pulse of race relations in the American 20th century. I mean, he was I think a friend of Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, who sometimes attended Baldwin. He was also a remarkable orator, and again, remarkably articulate. Well worth go look up some of his YouTube clips sometimes, or also, and I believe I've seen it on Amazon and somewhat maybe even Netflix. It's kind of one of those films that kind of bounces around on those some of those channels. But I Am Not Your Negro, which came out a few years ago, which is a very well worth watching documentary on Baldwin. But anyway, he was personal friends with civil rights leaders like Medgar Evers. Malcolm X came to one of his lectures one time, sitting and he looked down there. He was in the front row. He had some debates too with Malcolm X because there was a point where Malcolm X was much more sort of militant than Baldwin was a little more, I guess, hopeful. Also, a personal friend of Martin Luther King Jr.'s. Again, he was at all these funerals, right, in the first 10 rows. So this man, um, was a real witness to importance, especially important Black history in this country, and also just really internalized so much of its sadness. And there's a really salient mood. And boy, I remember I sometimes teach Sonny's Blues, the great short story he wrote too, and it's even more present somehow there. But just this dark, oppressive sort of sort of feeling this just sort of soaks through all of Harlem. It seems, and it seems that way here too, and just into the people, this inescapable feeling, of sort of nobodiness or something, that that you're being boxed in, that you can't fully express yourself. That seems to permeate his prose and his world, and in a way that would have been pretty accurate when he's writing about it. And again, I'm going to read a few passages here from it. But it starts off in kind of an astonishing fashion, right? Where you get that opening line, for my father's funeral, I had nothing. Oh, excuse me, I'm reading the wrong part there. Sorry about that. On the 29th of July, 1943, my father died. That's actually the opening sentence. And again, good kind of hook there, even just from a structural standpoint. Or writing fundamentals, right? On the same day, a few hours later, his last child was born, and then that he, and again, father dies, child's born. You get the entire cycle of life there, right in the first two short declarative sentences. And that paragraph, that opening paragraph, will end with, we drove my father to the graveyard through a wilderness of smashed plate glass. And there's been a huge riot that he's going to get to at the end of this essay in Harlem. And he will then go on to describe his father as just this embittered man. And his father, I think he raised... God, was there 10 or 11 kids? A very big family. I had to have seemed impossible for this guy to do. I mean, as poor as he was, and had no real, way of rectifying it. He was a man. Again, we get a lot about religion in the way people in poverty, I think in general, and especially black poverty in this country, can sort of cling on to religion. I'm going to read a little passage about that in a bit. And but basically, just that his father was who described him as by the window, right, just sort of shut up in his terrors. And his father had to have been a guy. He did give birth to. You managed again to keep all those kids fed in that household, which no small feat. Okay, but he's also a black man in a world that's sort of treating him like there's something wrong with him, and that seems to very much resent him and not think of him as equal. And I'm guessing again that Baldwin didn't get his remarkable talent and brains from nothing, but probably this was probably a man capable of a much bigger, grander, greater life than he was ever allowed, and it seemed to just he just internalized it and swallowed it. It just sort of made him a really hateful man. And there was that one sort of amazing let's see if I can find it here. In my mind's eye, I could see him sitting at the window, locked up in his terrors, hating and fearing every living soul, including his children, who had betrayed him too by reaching toward the world that had despised him. And his way of sort of dealing with being despised by the world was to sort of despise it back, and also to cling on to his religion and the code of ethics it gives, and to sort of create this small, sort of controllable world, very understandable, and what a lot of religious people do, right? Not that it's again, religion is also has been a salvation for somebody too, but it seemed, and maybe it did. Maybe he would have been even worse without it. I think this man, but you just do see, and we get Baldwin bearing witness to his father's descent. He gets to the point where he's so sort of severe in his religion. He gets kicked out of churches. People can't deal with him anymore. And again, these are mostly not white people. These are mostly black people that got to a point where they couldn't deal with him. And he ends up, dying in the saddest way imaginable, where he's in the hospital and sort of starves to death because he's convinced his own family is trying to poison him. And that poison is a recurring metaphor that Baldwin's using for basically for racism and for what happens to the person who's on the other end, the wrong end of that. And especially when it is a sort of overall cultural view. And again, his father's just sort of constantly simmering with this sort of rage. And there's one line where he's, after the father dies, he's like, and that, his rage would become my own. And again, this Baldwin did not have a lot of love for his father, as he was pretty frank about that. And he even says, not one of his children was ever glad to see him come home. And even when he tried to, put one of the little, when they were little, put him on his knee and bounce him around, and it was always, it was unnatural to him. It always sort of went wrong. They always did something wrong, not knowing what they did. He always flew into a rage, not knowing quite why. And again, that it was just a sort of never-ending, sort of almost like soaking like a vapor, through Harlem. And again, this is also extrapolated and externalized out into Harlem itself, which also seems to be seething and simmering. And again, it is almost like a gaseous vapor out there, waiting for someone to strike a match and for it to explode, right? And it's just like the father occasionally explodes and eventually just kind of self-immolates in a sense, and then and again, it kind of helps starve himself to death. His own paranoia. That the world's out to get him. So you see that, again, externalized into Harlem itself. And yes, it does sort of soak right into Baldwin's being. And we get his explosion right in that famous, probably the most famous scene of this essay, which is when he goes into the diner called an American Diner, I think, sort of the irony a bit thick there. And the waitress says to him, sorry, sir, we don't serve Negroes here. And again, this is Trenton, New Jersey, remind you, right? Not the deep Mississippi or something. And he says her voice went off in my head like the 1,000 bells of a nightmare. And again, the metaphorical writing, the imagistic writing, there's such a vibrancy to it, and there's such an exactitude to the Baldwin's articulation. He really can sort of very exquisitely nail down a point he's trying to make. Just trying to hang on one second. Let's see if I can show those years. And again, back to you're gonna circle back just to the religion thing for a bit. Religion is often the thing. People, especially poor folk, and again, it's easy to see why African Americans grasped onto and continued to hold tight. I remember when I was to Christian faith, right? I can remember working for my uncle in the florist, and I used to deliver flowers for him, and some of the best people at that. My favorite people running into would be black churches, and I think it was because just the religion. First of all, it really did seem to provide a kind of salvation for them, there was just a kind of joy that sort of emanated from them, at least when they were in there, and I was in it, which is when I was seeing these people. But because the Old Testament, very much, right? The story of Moses is the oppressed people who, as it turns out, were really the people of God. They were really the special people. And yeah, so, not hard to see why African Americans would relate to that and want to. But also presented here as God, religion in general, maybe God himself, as this sort of, imagined entity that understands their suffering and forgives their sinning. Because again, the men, especially men, it seems like in oppressed societies or in cultures that have been oppressed, men do not deal with humiliation and indignity very well. They often will take that out on those who don't have the same power they do, which are most often their wives and children. So again, there's this sense of righteous unfairness, and this sort of incompetent or impotent rage that not being able to do anything about it, along with all the guilt for lashing out at those who don't deserve it any more than you do, which inevitably happens when you put people under that kind of pressure all the time, right? But again, see, only talking about the Lord and why they were so attached to the religion. Only the Lord saw that midnight tears. Only He was present, right? When one of their children, moaning and wringing hands, paced up and down the room, when one slapped one's child in anger, and the recoil in the heart reverberated through heaven and became part of the pain of the universe. What a line that is, right? And when the children were hungry and sullen and distrustful, and no one watched them, and one watched them rather daily, growing wilder and further away and running headlong into danger. And then you see, especially the young males in the societies like that who often, get themselves into very risky behavior. Men have a need to, not just express themselves, but sort of establish themselves as something in somewhere that's someone who means something and has some sort of substance that's in their DNA. And listen, women too, but women are often are often the caretakers of children and will so often put that ahead of anything else. And that kind of often, not always. And again, there's a lot of crossover here. I know I'm speaking in generalities, but will be the ones who are hearth and home, while the man who's supposed to be or thinks of himself, and especially in 1940 when this is written. And again, I know a lot of gender norms have changed since then, but not being able to be that breadwinner or support his family the way he thinks he should will do terrible things to him, and then they often do terrible things in return. But again, we're often, as this is going on, then right, and Baldwin in that famous scene, right, they like the 1,000 bells of a nightmare after the woman says we don't serve Negroes, or picks up a glass. Something, again, this is not a rough, tough guy. He was also a gay man, Baldwin, so yeah, he had a lot of things working against him in 1940, let's just say. A very tough life. Spent much of it in France. Picks up his glass, smashes the mirror behind the bar. The whole bar turns on him. He barely makes it out of there. And he even says, I could have murdered her. He was trying to draw her close and get his hands around her neck. It was really something. And he talks about that rage that we're seeing, and he said every Negro understands this rage. And again, that rage is described, again, connected with poison. And again, his father's bitterness that became a kind of poison, and it was almost like he was being poisoned, sort of in that. And because he was so paranoid about being poisoned, he wouldn't even eat in his last days at the hospital. And it does seem like when he dies, it's almost as if this curse kind of goes into Baldwin, who thinks himself so different from his father, did not like and get along with his father when he was alive, but comes to understand him more and more as he gets older. And then when he goes to work in a place over in, I think from Harlem to Jersey, and gets he's sort of used to living in Harlem. And honestly, if you're a black kid living in Harlem, you're living in poverty, and yeah, he says this. I was aware of slavery and Jim Crow and all these sorts of things, but he lived among all black folks. There wasn't a ton of obvious in-your-face racism on a day-to-day basis, and he was sort of used to, someone gave him shit, he gave it back to him. But so when he goes to this work in this mostly white place, he acts like that too. And again, this is a young, brash guy, and they're all acting like sort of he's crazy, either sometimes laughing at him because of his powerlessness, and right in some ways, or really sort of cracking down on him. And either way, his frustrations, after a while, he starts thinking he's sort of going crazy and getting crazy, and he's sort of working this out as it goes on. And we're also seeing Harlem kind of being raised to a fever sort of pitch. There's a lot of problems with blacks and whites, it seems like, in the city. There's black soldiers being taken into the U.S. Army because World War II is being fought. And again, they're going to the Army. A lot of times, a huge Southern presence, and there's a much more military tradition in the south of this country than the north, and obviously the south of 1983, it's still apartheid down in the south, so they were not treated as equals, even when they were going to die for their country, put it like that. And it then sort of ends with that this with the that scene or the incident in a hotel, right? The Savoy Hotel, which I guess was a bit of a hotel of ill repute. I guess a lot of prostitutes and drug dealers and things like that sort of frequented this place. And, a cop ends up shooting a man. And the story goes, right, that the cop he shot the cop was giving the woman a hard time, and that a black soldier, U.S. soldier who should be respected, right, sort of stood up for her, tried to defend the woman's honor, and the white cop shoots him in the back, and he even says that the story see if I could find it here. He says the facts were somewhat different. For example, the soldier had not been shot in the back, was not dead, and the girl seems to have been as dubious a symbol of womanhood as her white counterpart in Georgia usually is. But no one was interested in the facts. They preferred the invention because this invention expressed and corroborated their hates and fears so perfectly. It is just as well to remember people are always doing this. So what a line that is. And again, that could describe Ferguson too, right? Where fact of the matter is that Michael Brown, at least there's no solid evidence that was a bad shooting, but there was plenty of evidence that there's a lot of racist policing in general going on in that, and a lot of racist just sort of legislation, and that the poorest and especially the black poor in Ferguson were sort of being, and I've more witnessed this a little bit too. I remember when I lived in Southwest Yonkers when I was going to school, seeing things like this, where they're ticketing cars with the alternate side of the street parking, and the parking tickets would be like $85, and it was, they're exorbitant, and if you can't pay them, they start tripling. It doubles after 30 days, and then doubles again, and pretty soon you can be so in debt just from parking on one parking ticket. Technically, can also $500 if you can't pay it in the first few. And again, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, that can be difficult. And again, it was that sort of rage, those sorts of things, and we're still living in the residue of all this, right? That may have triggered what went on in Ferguson, which kind of begins the Black Lives Matter movement. We all know that there been plenty of. We all saw poor George Floyd, which really it was a murder, it seems to me, in the streets, right by that cop. Whether or not he was trying to kill him, I don't know, but it was certainly at least a sort of reckless homicide situation, right? The way he was treated. We get some other, and again with Baldwin, we really do, I think, get mapped out an exquisite sort of articulation and sort of understanding of what's being prejudiced against does to someone. And so many, and the sort of impotent rage that becomes self-destructive, and destructive, and hurts the people that your family, the people you don't, your neighbors, the people you don't really want to hurt. Right? Whenever we have these riots, they usually don't make it into Beverly Hills or the Upper West Side and burn those places. Right? It's almost always their own neighborhoods, unfortunately. And we had that great line from him. Right? It is the ghetto's chronic need to smash things. Again, Baldwin is terrific for that, and this is sometimes tough to read, but also just beautifully, even though it's a very dark topic, articulated piece, and you can learn a lot about writing, reading James Baldwin.